Okay, everybody. Small little change in format for this lecture because the microphone thing wasn't working properly at the Academy lecture. So what I'm going to do now is I'm re-recording the little bit of tuition that we did regarding the agency law. It's just the last little bit of agency law. I'll finish off here. Then I'll have a separate recording for the half of consumer law that we started. All right. So we finished off at estoppel, agency by estoppel. So we were talking about how you create agency, and we had Ernie, if you remember. So the different ways of creating agency: express, implied, agency by ratification, necessity, etc. And then the final one was agency by estoppel. All right. So I told you before that estoppel means to be stopped from doing something or stopped, prevented from going back on your word. All right. So agency by estoppel is where a person allows a third party to believe that somebody is acting as their agent, and if they do that, then they're prevented from denying that at a later stage. All right. So, for example, the case in your book, Freeman and Lockyer versus Buckhurst Park Properties, you'd have seen where a director of a firm or company, sorry, um, entered the company into a contract. I think they hired an architect or something like that, and then the company tried to refuse to pay the architect, saying that the director wasn't authorized to hire that architect. Uh, However, it was reasonable for the third party to assume, so the architect in this case, to assume that that director had authority, because that's just a reasonable thing to believe that a director of a company would have authority to enter the company into contracts. All right. So we refer to that as ostensible authority or apparent authority. All right. So if it's reasonable for a third party to assume, for example, that you're working as an agent on behalf of somebody else, then if you do a deal with them, that somebody else cannot then deny that you were the agent, because they've given the impression you were the agent. Now that can happen quite expressly. If I was going to do a deal with you on something and I said, well, listen, you need to speak to Mary Murphy or whoever, she's acting on my behalf. Well, obviously I can't then go back on that later on and say, well, actually no, she's not acting on my behalf. All right, so that's where it's quite a straight line, obvious, given of the impression. But sometimes it's a bit more vague. So Mary Murphy, for example, might be my agency, my agent, for a number of years, and then maybe I fire her, but I don't make it clear, I don't announce it to my clients or potential clients that she's no longer acting on my behalf. So potentially then I've given the impression that she still is acting as my agent, all right? And in that case, she will be agent by estoppel. If she does something on my behalf within the realm of her previous agency authority, I wouldn't be allowed to deny that fact, all right? So that was agency by estoppel. Then we move on to the duties of agent. They're all quite clear cut, easily explained. The duty to operate with due care, skill, and diligence, meaning that you do your job properly and for the benefit of your principal, in the best interest of your principal, not for yourself as such. All right. You have a chariot inns case there in your manual, which is an insurance case. All right. If you're instructed by for example, by your principal to take out insurance for them for something, and you didn't do it, or you didn't take out the right insurance, well, you obviously didn't follow the proper due care that you need to take in your action as agent. All right. The same thing applies to professionals such as solicitors, doctors, dentists, etc. They refer to it sometimes as common professional practice or professional standards. So if you don't reach the standards or you don't follow what will be proper protocols, you're not actually taking due care, and therefore you're in breach of your duty. Um, Another duty of agents is to obey lawful instructions. So, for example, if you're told to do something by your principal, you have to do it, so long as it's a lawful thing and it's within your agency. So, if your principal tells you to go down the street there and rob a bank, well, that's illegal, so you wouldn't actually have to follow that. All right. You have to avoid conflicts of interest or making secret profits. There are other duties. So, for example, if I hire you as my agent to sell a property of mine, if the property, let's say I've agreed with you that I won't sell it for anything less than €500,000. So you go ahead then and you find a buyer who's going to pay 700,000, but you don't tell me that. You tell me that you've sold it for 500,000 and you're keeping 200,000 for yourself. That's making a secret profit. It's also a form of conflict of interest. you're not allowed to be doing those things, okay? Obviously, if you get caught at that, or if I find out about it, then I'll be going looking for the 200,000. Another interesting one that sometimes comes up in exam questions is the duty not to delegate. So when a principal instructs you to do something or hires you as an agent, you're supposed to do it yourself. You're not supposed to delegate it to somebody else. And what happened there in the case in the book, John McCann versus Pow, John McCann and company were hired by Pow to find a buyer for a property. They didn't actually do it themselves. They got somebody else. I think it was Douglas and Company was the name of the other company. They got them to find a buyer. They found the buyer. The property was sold. Pow refused to pay the agent's fees or commission to John McCann and Company, and they sued him to make him pay. And he didn't have to pay because he proved that they delegated the work. They didn't do it themselves. Therefore, he didn't have to pay them. All right. There's a couple of other ones mentioned in your manual: the duty to account and the duty regarding communication confidentiality. So obviously, an agent has to account for all the business that they do within the agency. Um, account for money and various things to make sure that it's all above board. And you must give the information to the principal whenever it's asked for. And also, there's the duty to maintain confidentiality. Obviously, that's a business duty that's very important. All right. Moving swiftly along, then we have the rights of an agent. An agent has a right to be paid the agreed amount. So usually, an agency will agree a fee or a commission for the performance of their work, their duty under the contract. Once they do that, then they're entitled to the agreed amount, fee or commission, and they should be paid that. Should also be paid expenses for properly incurred expenses, things like travel expenses, administrative costs, stuff like that. All right. And there's a third one mentioned in your manual there. The agent has a right to be indemnified by the principal against losses and liabilities that occur. Now, these will be normal losses during the course of the business of the agency, not some other outlandish thing or something that had nothing to do with the agency contract. All right. Then we move on to liability of an agent. So there's two key headings when you're talking about the liability of an agent. The first one is whether the agent is working within their authority, and the second one is whether they're working outside of their authority. So if they're working within their authority as given to them by their principal, then they're not personally liable if things go wrong. They wouldn't be sued for breach of contract by a third party. All right. But if the third party wasn't aware about the fact that they were operating as an agent, then the third party might actually sue the agent rather than the principal because they don't know that a principal exists in the scenario. Sometimes you may be just suing the agent for the sole purpose of finding out who the principal is so that you can then go and sue the principal. Okay? Then we have contracting outside of authority. So if you're contracting outside of your authority as an agent, you would be personally liable because you've obviously broken the rules. You've gone beyond your power, and therefore you're the one who's going to be having to pay the consequences. All right. Moving on to termination of agency. This is the last little piece of agency. It shouldn't be difficult for you to understand it or remember it because all the same kind of things apply for termination of agency as apply for termination of a general contract. Okay. So you're looking at the actions of the parties. So that's where the agent and the principal both agree. Or maybe the agent refuses, resigns, that's revocation, or sorry, that's renunciation. Maybe the principal fires the agent, that will be exampled by revocation. Or you just have done the job, complete the time, all right? You may hand in your notice, that kind of stuff. They're actions of the party that bring agency to a completion. But there's also legal things. So legal provision provides that in the event of death, bankruptcy, mental incapacity, frustration, expiry of a fixed term, any of those things happen, they bring the agency to an end. All right? So that's the end of agency law. I'm going to end that recording there now, okay? And we'll start then afresh with consumer law. Okay?